I think we'll get started here. This is a presentation on game development Cascades. So first, a little bit about who we are. I'm Eric. I write BlackBerry apps, mostly games, Pixelated, Starbeam, some of the more well-known ones I have. This is Brian.
Hello. Am I? Hello.
He does Visual Connection, some other games. And we're here to talk about how you can do gaming in Cascades. And so we felt that the best way to do that was to make a game for the session to show off what's possible, what you can do in terms of animation and integration of score loop, and general game design. And first, before we go any further, I want to note that all of the source code is on GitHub. So you can download it, you can look at it, you can play around with it, you can make your own games from it. We didn't have time yet, but we're hoping to move this over to the official BlackBerry GitHub in a few weeks. I'll let Brian show off the game we made.
So, can we go and switch to the BlackBerry? So, here we have the main screen that you'll see, or level selector screen. You've seen this in probably any game you've ever played before. And then once you open a level, you'll go to it, progress through the game, go through levels, and so on and so forth, and you can always go back to your home screen. Also, we have integrated score loop into this game. However, don't think that the Wi-Fi is working very well here, so here's where the leaderboard would show. But we're going to run through our game, showing you a little bit of code. Just wanted to give you a little taste of, here's the initial level selector screen, and then game screens. And so let's go ahead and take a look at some code.
Can we switch back? So level selection, as Brian explained, this is entry point. You can use it to show levels completed, levels locked. The code here that we're releasing is basically the exact code I use in my game Starbeams. And at a high level look, it's just a scroll view with a custom component called level button inside of it. Then another tip is if you remember the last level played, you can automatically scroll to that when you start the game, and that allows users to get right back to where they left off, and it's a fairly good guess at what level they're going to want to play next. So let's dig into the code a little bit. Okay, this is levelbutton.qml, which is our custom component that we created for showing off each little level. The custom component itself is fairly simple. It's written in only QML. There's not even any C++ layer here. And it's a container as a property of value, and that value will correspond to the level number. So the level button for level 1 will have value of 1, level button for level 2 will have value of 2, and so on. The background is defined via an image paint definition, which is an attached object. We are forcing the width and the height here, and then we use a tap handler to tell when people have touched the button. Tap handler is better than touch events because there's less mistakes can be made. And on tapped, we use that value and go call a new level. So now we're going to look at, this would be in your main.qml or wherever you're actually putting the slide. But you bring in the custom component just as an attached object as a component definition. And then you use the component definition to create actual level button objects. Like I said, the whole thing is just a big scroll view. That way you can have infinite number of levels on a page and not worry about is there actually space for it. And then on creation completed, you loop through your levels up to max level, set to whatever. And then every time you go through, you make a new custom component, you set the value of the custom component, and then you add it to the container. I'll go turn this over to Brian. He's going to explain some of the details of the actual level creation.
All right. So once you've picked your level, in this case we're on level 2 in that screenshot, but you'll get pushed to this new screen, which I believe we called is a new QML file, something like game level or level screen. And so here we have a JavaScript function that'll load the actual level. And then we want to set up win-loss conditions. We use various things. The Q timer is actually for the timer up top. And then user inputs are the submit button and the 2 switches for the game. So we're again going to look at some code. So here is, it'll take the value of your current level. So say you're at that home screen and you press level 1, it'll get that on current level value changed, and it'll run that level function, which is a JavaScript function that's defined elsewhere, and that's why it's called level functions. And then your JavaScript function that actually loads the level is a simple switch function that just gives properties such as where these tubes will be laid out and how the buttons will be placed. And when we show the levels again, we'll bring up the BlackBerry, and you'll see how each level, the tubes are in a different place, and that's what that switch function conditions are doing. It's saying the conditions in which they'll be displayed. So here's where we get to the winning conditions for your level. This is where the box is sliding back and forth. And so based off your box's condition, we just set up variables of where it is translated along the X and giving it a score, and then having if-else statements to assign a score based off where you stop it using your switches. As well as we want to have our switches do things such as stop the game timer and add up your 2 scores. And pop up a dialog that's saying, congratulations, you've either won, or sorry, you've lost. So a little bit more on the Q timer. So the Q timer is, what would it be called? A Qt library that we can call into Cascades. So that first line of code will actually go into a C++ file, and then after that you can use an attached object of a Q timer and set your interval in milliseconds. So 1,000 will get you 1 second. And on timeout is every interval. Run that function, which will make your timer go down 1, as well as do anything else you'd like. And then once your timer hits 0, you'll get your end game dialog saying you have run out of time. Okay, hold on. Let me go back a couple slides. So these win conditions was on the actual submit button and not on the switches. So that's where it's grabbing where your positions were, and then going forward 2 slides. This is grabbing your switches where you stop your boxes. So sorry about a little confusion there. It'll make a little more sense when we bring up the game again and we walk through what we explained. So this is a gesture handler that's on an image view of a switch. And so what it does is whenever you tap that switch, it changes your image to the off state of the switch, as well as stopping your animations. And I just have a little bit of fancy if-else statements depending on which animation is being played. So I believe my next slide is where I start talking about those animations. So animations are a built-in feature of Cascades. You have various types you can use. In the case of this game, we've only used translation animation, so just moving those boxes side to side or up and down. However, to make the game a little more interesting, I played around with easing curves, which allow you to speed up or slow down your into or out to of the function or animation. So you can have it start fast and slow down, or slow down at the end, any variation of that. I believe there's something like 20 or 30 different stock easing curves you can use, and just makes it look a little more realistic. And then finally, once the animation completes, you can call a signal called onEnded, and I use that to alternate the animations. So it's actually an animation that goes to the right, and then onEnded, it'll play the next animation, which moves it to the left. So what we're actually animating is just a container that's colored green or red in this case. Whereas, you can animate anything you want once you call in this animations array. So, like I said, in this case, it's just a container that's colored green or red, whichever one this happens to be. And here we have it translating 500 pixels over the course of 2 seconds, which, by the way, animations have timers sort of built into them. So you can call duration automatically. You don't have to set up a queue timer, which is nice. And then, like I said, onEnded, it'll play the next animation. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Eric for in-app purchases.
So in our game, we use in-app purchases just to get past. If you want to play level 3 or anything higher, use in-app purchases. Obviously, that's not the best case for a full-size game, but that's what we're doing. And this is similar to the layout I use in games such as Exploding Boxes, where you get a certain number of levels for free, and then you can play the rest of the game. You can also use in-app purchases for other things, such as power-ups inside the game. And there's also this idea of consumable and non-consumable in-app purchasing. For this game, we're focusing on non-consumable things where you buy it once and you keep it forever. But you can also have the idea that, you have in-app purchase for, say, some coins, and then you can spend them and they're gone. I'm a big fan of using in-app purchasing as opposed to having a free app and a paid app. But you can do whatever you want. So let's go into the code a little bit, and I want to point out that most of this code is based on the official in-app purchase sample at GitHub that BlackBerry has released. They have pretty much, this is all you need to do on the C++ layer. The first line is only for testing. It kind of throws the whole payment thing into a testing mode. And then you attach it, and you're good for the C++. You also got to bring in the 2 files, but you don't even really need to look at them. They work, and they're good, and there's no reason you need to modify it. So let's jump to the QML. You import it, and then you have a payment service control, which you use as an attached object. The payment service control has a lot more functions and a lot more callbacks than what's shown here. We've simplified it for, like we said, pretty much one-time purchase of an upgrade. But it does much more. Here we have on purchase success. You handle that with, unlocking your levels or giving the power up to your character. And then you have on error when it's not a success, where you can either do nothing or I think in our game we dismiss a dialogue or something on air. But if you're using non-consumable in-app purchasing, you want to treat things that have already been purchased as a successful purchase as well. And now we'll go actually calling that code, which you'll see is very straightforward. It's payment control.purchase. You throw in 4 strings corresponding to the app ID and SKU that you've set up in BlackBerry App World on the other end. But everything in regards to in-app purchasing is very straightforward, very simple, and there's not really any reason not to use it.
Yeah, so real quick to expand on that, your app ID, your SKU, and your app name will be set up whenever you make that in goods in your Manage Apps tab of App World. Is that what it's called?
Probably.
Something, yeah. So you don't need to come up with that stuff. I believe since this game's not on App World, or if you're just testing it, you can just make up whatever you want as long as you're consistent throughout your app. But just let it be known that once this app is for real, you grab actual information that will be given to you. So you don't have to really come up with any of that.
Yeah, because we're running this in test mode, you throw in whatever strings here and just kind of go with it. But you'll need to correspond to your names you use in App World once you actually get out of test mode and try to actually sell the app. Now we're going to move on to score loop and leaderboards because we are talking about games and doing gaming in Cascades. And this gives you a lot of features. It allows you to plug into the BlackBerry Games app, which is on BlackBerry 10, and helps give your game more visibility. Actually, let's show that.
Yes.
Can we switch to the BlackBerry? Okay. So we've actually got the leaderboard to load. Wi-Fi is finally working. And so this is what we're creating here. And this is pulling actual data from some of our devices.
So I'll play through level 3 real quick. Oh, I was looking at the wrong one. Hopefully I don't run out of time. Oh, this game's too hard. Come on. Close enough. So we have it set up where once you've beat our final level, it'll pop to the leaderboard. Oh, it's giving us raw data. There it goes.
It mostly works.
So those are actual scores that are on different devices. I believe this one is my Dev B. Player 4 is my Dev Alpha C.
Yeah.
Player 1 is my actual phone, because I'm the best at the game. So, yeah, these are all just set up through our accounts on the Games app. So.
Yeah, and then even for testing, you do need to set up an actual account at ScoreLoop. Enter a little bit data, and you'll get a key, secret ID, whatnot, and then you'll have to throw that into your C++ code. It's just you need the right string, so it'll correspond. Can we go back to slides? Okay. So the GUI here, this screenshot is the same code, but it's from Q10, so it's using the dark theme. But the GUI is just the list view, and it's really that simple. It's using the various data from ScoreLoop and presenting it. Code for this is a bit more complicated, so I've left out some of the details in the slides here, but on the GitHub page is the full code, so be sure to look at that before you do too much based off of these slides. But first we have the constructor for our main C++ class, which is called BB Live Game in our case. So inside the constructor, we start the score loop thread, Well, we create the score loop thread, and then we start it. There's also actually a callback for, hey, yes, this has finally successfully started. Not here, but... And then if you go to the bottom, you see a score loop thread, and this will return the instance of the thread in case we need to use that. If we need to use that directly. But you usually won't want to do that. Instead, do something like the submit score method in the middle, where you, from the QML, you have your score, and you submit it. You just do app.submitScore. I'll call this method, and from there, on the C++ level, you then call submit score again on the score loop thread. So let's, I believe this is the, oh no, QML. So this is the actual QML, which is very straightforward. Like I said, it's a list view. You have a data model. It's sorted. Nothing too fancy here. On creation completed, you have to do two things. One, remember back here, we have access to the actual score loop thread. Well, what we're doing first here on creation completed is we get the actual score loop instance, and then we listen for the signal for load leaderboard completed. And we connect that to our method that's also here in the QML on the bottom. Once we've hooked up that listener, we then ask to load the leaderboard, and in this case, we're loading the all-time scores instead of 24-hour scores, and we're saying we want the first 100 of them. Okay, so I'm going to show a little bit of the actual score loop thread code. There's a lot here, but like I said, the whole thing's in the GitHub, so look at the actual code. What we're doing here is we're creating a controller. We're setting the range. We're creating a range object and setting the range from the start of 0 to whatever length we sent in our case, 100. And then we ask to load the scores. Now we load leaderboard. We have the callback for that. We get the score list. And then we need to pretty much take the score list, but then get it formatted such that we can then use in the QML. So that means creating a Q variant list. The Q variant list itself composed of, it's really a list of Q variant maps. So what we're doing here is we're iterating through the score list, extracting the data for each item in it, and saving it as a rank, a score, and a username inside of a map. And that's some data that the QML can understand. So once we have all of that in a list, we get down here at the bottom, we emit the signal, say it's ready, the QML gets that the signal is ready, and then that's where, back to this slide, on the very bottom, we are passed leaderboard data, which we then use to set the data model and then display the actual scores, as in this code. All right, so I'm now going to turn it over, and we're going to talk about...
well, real quick, did we want to go back to the game?
Sure. We'll run back through the game for a second. Can we switch over to the phone?
So let's just real quick run through everything that we just went over, just to give it make a little more sense. So again, here's our main level selector screen. Each of those buttons or level buttons are that custom component that he talked about first. And then once you, whatever you, I guess what would be the best way to say this, however many you say is the max number, it'll create that many levels.
So here, we said, okay, 10 levels, and so it created 10. Making 200 levels is simply changing that 10 to a 200.
Yeah. And So in the case of me saying that I set up a JavaScript function to load each level on a switch function, if I go to any of these other levels, it just doesn't do anything just because it doesn't know where to put the tubes, whereas I've set up level 1 and 2. Oh, I guess if I push 2, I've set it up so it'll read that JavaScript function and put the tubes in the correct place. And I don't know how subtle you can tell, but I have the animation set up a little different on every level. Possibly whenever you play with it in GitHub, you'll see that I changed the durations on each of the levels as well as set up easing curves. And then I guess one thing to know, I have it so if you're on any level other than 2 or other than 3, you'll get progressed to the next level. And that's where it just runs that JavaScript function looking at whatever level number you're on up top. It's cut off a little bit on this projector, but it says level 3 up top. It grabs that level number, runs it through our switch function, changes our animations accordingly. And like we saw, either at the end of level 3 you go to score loop, or you can set a page on here. And then to just be a little more basic about this, this is just a navigation pane with the back button turned off on the levels, and it's turned on with score loop to give it that more native feel whenever you're in your high score board.
But then you still have your standard flow that you can, or the peak gesture you can use inside the levels so you can look back. And then the background here is just the background tiling an image. We didn't go into that too much, but
I guess other things, we're just looking at image views layered on top of containers that are animated. It's a lot of stock components just kind of pieced together in something that looks a little bit more fun than I don't know, say a typical app. I mean, this is an image button that does this, and these are just gesture switches that flip between 2 images. Probably could have used an image button as well. Just chose not to, wanted to show another way to do kind of the same thing. So I guess now we'll switch it over to talk a little bit about Cocos. So go ahead and switch back to the slides.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Eric. So my name is Suavek. I work for BlackBerry for developer relations, and we thought it'd be worthwhile to spend a few minutes and talk about how to integrate Cocos 2DX into Cascades to kind of leverage some of the advanced capabilities that the framework provides to you in terms of animations and other features as well. So let me just show you, I mean, there's a project that we have put on GitHub, which you can download. I'll give you a link in a few seconds. If you can just go over to BlackBerry. All right. Can you switch to the BlackBerry? Yeah, so this is a simple project, but it basically does all the setup for you. It's actually using Cocos 2D and Cascades. So essentially, this whole black window is the foreign window I'll be talking about. And that's where you'd be able to use Cocos 2DX. You can size this window or overlay it on top of Cascades applications and do some fancy animations there. So let's switch back to the slides. So if you saw the demo at the Jam keynote, they actually used Cocos 2D with Box 2D, the physics engine, and these are the effects we're talking about achieving. So essentially connecting Cascades and some native game engines and libraries is pretty easy, and what you need to do is you need to rely on the foreign window control and embed native Cascades window there. So the thing to note is that our traditional demos that we have had on the website, they use foreign window with OpenGL. And unless you're familiar with OpenGL, that can be quite complex to do even something like simple 2D graphics. You have to do a lot of setup, a lot of work to just get started. So Cocos 2D simplifies a lot of that for you. So, who is this targeted for? Essentially, in a game such as this, if you are looking at perhaps having some explosions or particle effects, but you still want to use Cascades, you want to use some of the UI controls, and you want to animate certain features in a much fancier way, that you'd probably start taking a look at that. So a little bit more about the framework in detail. Essentially, it's a 2D games framework. If you're looking to move into 3D, this is not the framework. You have to look at something like Unity, and then you'd probably go away from Cascades altogether because it would get, it would be, you can still do a 3D framework in Cascades, but then performance, is an issue possibly because you have an extra Cascades thread that, is there for no reason. So what does Cocos 2D simplify for you? Well, the flow between scenes, and I'm going to open up my editor and show you how that kind of looks. And every object is a sprite, which you can animate, rotate, and scale. So actually, in Cascades, that's pretty easy to do. So, you have that effect in Cocos 2D. But things like waves and twirls and like lens effects, then we're kind of getting more complex, things that you don't necessarily have in Cascades. And other things like explosions and fireworks to make things burn, and it's really easy. If you look at Cocos 2D, there are a lot of samples which you can just drop and start playing around with. So let's look at what's involved, and there's I provide a 10-step summary here, but essentially a colleague of mine, Ramprasad, created this demo, and you should check it out. It's on GitHub, and it has all the steps on how to get started and set it up. And so make sure you don't miss a single step, because it's actually, when you start compiling it, it's a lot of libraries, and you're going to get a lot of compile errors. But I'm going to try to go over some of that. So essentially what you need to do is import Cocos 2DX libraries, and there's a slight modification that we actually make to the Cocos 2DX libraries to use a child window under Cascades window group. So essentially, that lets us overlay the foreign window on top of Cascades. You have to build your Cocos 2DX libraries after that and create a new Cascades project. And essentially, it's all based on the foreign window control that you have in Cascades. And I'm going to show you how that looks in QML. And the other thing you need to remember is the Cocos 2DX game loop has to execute on a separate thread. So you have to create a new thread, and I'll show you how that's done. And that's pretty much it in terms of the setup. So let's switch to the Mac, and I'm going to just briefly describe some of how it looks, just to give you an idea. Okay, so this is my Momentic, and this is the Cocos 2DX projects that right here on the side where I'm pointing, which you will need to import. And I want to show you, I think it's going to be under platform, BlackBerry. There was a few files here that were modified in Cocos 2D. This is not really that relevant, but just, if you want to play around with it yourself. Right here is where you join the child window to the Cascades window group. So that was the piece of code that was modified. So make sure you copy those files over the default Cocos2dx files. Otherwise, Cascades won't display this. So this is something that's already done for you. When you download that sample, you don't really have to worry about it. So let's look at the Cocos2dx integrated project, which is another project that's available to you on GitHub. And let's start with the QML file. Okay. So this is essentially what we're talking about. So if you, consider Brian's and Eric's game here, and you look at their QML, how would you start to kind of integrate some of these other Cocos2dx components? As you'd create this foreign window element, and this is where all the action for Cocos2d happens. How is that foreign window element connected? Then you start taking a look at the code for the connection. Is right here when you start to create your main application UI, and then you start your separate thread right here, and you find your foreign window element, and then you start your thread, and then you connect your window to this group ID right here. So in this sample, you can see how you kind of make this connection. And this is really, the connecting code, so it's there for you. You don't really have to worry about it. I think the most important thing here is how do you kind of cross over to the other world, meaning to the Cocos2dx world. And where is that? And that's in the hello world scene. So what you're seeing here in this C++ file, this is actually Cocos2dx code right here. And what you're seeing is how the actual scene is created, and this is no longer Cascades or QML. You're actually creating a menu item image. You're setting its position. You're adding, a child to a menu, creating a label, and then creating the hello world sprite image, and then you're done. So essentially, for this, in order to understand how to do this, you have to go to the Cocos2dx website and kind of read that documentation, because you're really in a different framework altogether. So there, you can start to integrate Box2D to get the physics effects, and that's kind of the basic setup of of this. So it may be something worthwhile if you're kind of looking to go beyond simple animations and you want some fancy effects there. I think that's all we've got, right? I mean, unless you guys have any questions for us.
Yeah, we definitely want to take some questions. Try to use the microphone because this is being recorded, so we want to make sure that the questions get recorded as well.
I have a tangentially related foreign window question. I saw in the release notes, it was just a small statement in passing that said that you could have the content of your foreign window be a different size than your foreign window itself, and it would scale it. And I saw that in the release notes, but it was nowhere, it wasn't documented anywhere. I'm just wondering if any of you would know more details about that, or someone that I could ask about that.
I could answer. I mean, I'm not sure myself, but there's a guy in the BlackBerry Jam Zone, Roberto. He is an expert on the foreign window. Just ask for Roberto, and you should be able to answer that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, you mentioned an example in Cocos2dx. We have a project in Cocos2d iPhone, and we are trying to integrate with Cocos2dx using Cocos Builder. Can you run by your experience if you have worked on that area and how hard that'd be? It's a simple 2D game with PNG animation.
I don't really have that much experience with that, but once again, I can connect you with Ram, who actually did write this sample, and we can probably get his thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, in the Cascades gaming development, how do you guys keep track of the level progression and the user score for each level? Do you guys use some kind of database?
No, we don't do anything that complicated. There's no databases in it. In the sample, if you look at like the Cascades sample, they have the Starship setting sample. I don't know if you've seen, and it's just a get method and a set method, and no, it's not get set. It's save and
Get and save.
is it? It's okay. It's get and save, and pretty much you save it as a pair. Pretty much, you know, you have this is level. Has it been saved or not? I usually only use databases when there's more complex data. If I have, like, say, for the scores, we don't save that locally. We let score loop take care of all of that. But if you were to save the scores locally, where you have, a score, a username, and other data, in that case, I would use a database. But here it's just saving as a string.
You could use queue settings. It's a
Yeah.
persistent map table. You just declare queue settings, and it will persist it for you.
That's what it's using behind the scenes. Any more questions? All right, I think we're good then. Please be in touch with us if you want to be. Reach out and.
Switch back to the slides. You should have our info.
Yeah, so get in touch or come talk to us afterwards if you want. We'd love to hear from any of you. Thank you.